In 1803, Napoleon of France would sell the French colony of Louisiana to the United States. The city of New Orleans and the Mississippi River were important as they served as a mode of transportation and a vital trade region for the Americans living west of the Appalachian Mountains. After a slave rebellion in French Haiti and the growing cost for war in Europe, Napoleon proposed to the United States the sale of the territory of Louisiana for $15 million, which President Thomas Jefferson accepted. The purchase expanded American territory as far as the Rocky Mountains, but it also put a dent in the American economy and reduced the political power of regions such as New England, which threatened secession because of it. The Democrat President James K. Polk, elected in 1844, looked west, hoping for Americans to settle in Oregon, Texas, and California. In 1845, the United States annexed Texas, but the boundary was disputed. Mexico claimed that the U.S. annexation ended at the Nueces River. The U.S. claimed that it ended further southwest along the Rio Grande River. American troops were sent to Texas to bait the Mexican troops in attacking the U.S., and it worked. U.S. Congress declared war on April 25, 1846. The opening moves of the war saw General Zachary Taylor marching his troops south of the Rio Grande River, winning the Battle of Monterrey, and moved to the town of Buena Vista in February 1847, where he dealt a crushing blow to Mexican General Antonio Lopez de Santa Anna. Throughout 1846, a few thousand American troops made their way down the California coastline, capturing cities along the way, and culminating in the siege of Los Angeles and the remaining Mexican forces being confronted in San Diego. The California campaign ended on January 13, 1847, with the Treaty of Chihuahua, ending hostilities in modern-day California. In February 1847, General Winfield Scott launches the first ever American amphibious landing in Veracruz and advances towards Jalapa, driving the Mexicans from a strong defensive position east of Jalapa at Cerro Gordo. After Cerro Gordo, Scott advanced towards Puebla, opening the way to Mexico City. Mexico surrendered on February 2, 1848. The Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo gave the United States control of Texas along the Rio Grande River, along with modern-day California, Nevada, Utah, Colorado, Oklahoma, Kansas, Wyoming, and most of New Mexico and Arizona. The treaty was put into effect on the 30th of May. As per the treaty, the U.S. also agreed to protect Mexican territory from attacks made by Native American tribes. For the first half of the 19th century, the territory of Oregon was hotly disputed between the United States and the United Kingdom. As American immigration to Oregon increased in the early 1840s, the U.S. Congress had to look for a solution. The Oregon Treaty, signed on June 15, 1846, extended the U.S. border along the 49th parallel, except for Vancouver Island. Since the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo, the United States had been looking for a southern railway passage to the Pacific. An opportunity for this could be found in the Mesilla Valley, which Mexico owned. Mexico demanded that they receive financial compensation for Native American attacks from the U.S., which the U.S. had to protect Mexico from, but never guaranteed financial compensation. James Gadsden, U.S. Minister to Mexico, was sent to Mexico to negotiate a new border in exchange for money. Signed in 1854, the Gadsden Purchase had the U.S. pay $10 million for just shy of 30,000 square miles of land in modern-day Arizona and New Mexico, creating the modern-day U.S.-Mexico border. In the mid-1820s, the invention of the compact steam engine allowed for greater output and more factories outside of textile mills, leading to a rise of industry in the United States. Most of this industrialization occurred north of the Mason-Dixon line, leaving the South more reliant on agriculture. Roughly 90% of the United States manufacturing output was in the North. Private companies and the federal government funded programs to improve on country-wide transportation. New England and the Midwest would have most of the United States railroads by 1860. Due to this industrialization, many Irish and Germanic peoples immigrated to the United States in the 1830s and 40s, escaping poverty, famine, and unrest in their homelands. Many Irish Catholics who settled in New York and New England found it difficult to adapt to urban and Protestant environments, sometimes facing discrimination and harassment. Many Germans fled Germany following the revolutions of 1830 and 1848. However, many also fled to preserve their traditions, which were at risk of fading away as Western Europe industrialized. Germans mainly settled in agricultural frontier towns in Pennsylvania, the Appalachians, and the Midwest. In the South, immigration was not as common, and most of the economy was driven by plantation owners who legally owned black slaves. By 1815, cotton picked by slaves was America's most valuable export, becoming more valuable than all exports combined by 1860. Other cash crops, such as sugarcane and tobacco, were also grown. Slaves worked in all aspects of the Southern lifestyle and economy, such as on farms and plantations, towns and cities, in homes as servants, and in the few and far between industrial factories. Virtually all slaves were under the threat of sale, especially after a financial loss or personal crisis on the owner's behalf. Entire black families could be scattered upon purchase at auction blocks, never to be seen again. Many slaves resisted the harsh treatment by tampering with the machinery, under-delivering on quotas, and even outright killing their masters. Many slaves formed communities between other slaves on a plantation, forming underground cultures where they sang songs and shared stories about freedom and life outside of slavery. Many escaped looking for freedom in the North, and many traveled the Underground Railroad, aided by ordinary people and freed slaves looking for freedom in Canada. People like Harriet Tubman, an escaped slave herself, helped slaves in their escape to Canada through the Underground Railroad. In the 1810s, the United States government sought to remove Aboriginal peoples from American lands. In the 1820s and 30s, 5 Aboriginal nations, the Cherokee, Creek, Choctaw, Chickasaw, and Seminole, were slowly forced out of their lands in southern Appalachia, Florida, and the Mississippi through unfair treaties and increasingly aggressive white settlers. Between 1837 and 1838, roughly 100,000 people from these 5 nations were forced out of their homes and forced to walk some 5,000 miles of trail to designated Indian territory west of the Mississippi River. On this Trail of Tears, approximately 15,000 died due to starvation and disease. The former Aboriginal lands were then given to white settlers and landowners, allowing slavery in the South to make a bigger presence. As America expanded westward towards the Pacific, the South wanted to expand slavery into newly acquired territories. Meanwhile, the North did not want them to be slave states. The South wanted the territories to choose for themselves whether they should allow slaves, and wanted to preserve their slavery-based economy and heritage in the United States. The North wanted to curb the expansion of slavery in the West out of fear that if the South and slavery were to have a majority in the nation and government, that the South would pressure the North into accepting slavery into their industrialized economy. These conflicting ideals led to debate in Congress whether to allow newly acquired territories to make themselves free states or slave states. In 1817, Missouri applied for statehood on the basis that they would not have slavery restrictions. At the time, there were 11 free states and 11 slave states. If Missouri was admitted into the Union as either one, this would tip the power balance in the United States. 1820 would allow Missouri to enter the Union as a slave state, but would also carve out the state of Maine from Massachusetts and have it enter the Union as a free state, so power could be balanced out equally. As part of the Missouri Compromise, slavery was prohibited in the Great Plains territories until they were consolidated into states. After the Mexican-American War, gold was found in California in 1848, kicking off the California Gold Rush. 200,000 prospectors migrating to California allowed California to apply for statehood in 1849. Like in 1820, began a debate on the issues of slavery in free states versus slave states. The Compromise of 1850 allowed California to enter a free state, but it also banned the slave trade in the District of Columbia. Along with this, it introduced a strict Fugitive Slaves Act, requiring officials and citizens in the North to help with capturing and returning escaping black slaves seeking freedom in Canada through the Underground Railroad. The Fugitive Slave Act led to writers like Harriet Beecher Stowe writing anti-slave and abolitionist books. Harriet herself wrote the book Uncle Tom's Cabin, depicting a Christian slave named Uncle Tom finding friendship with a girl named Little Ava. After her death, Tom is whipped to death for refusing to disclose the location of some escaped slaves. The book concerned the poor and harsh treatment of humans as property. Because of this, Uncle Tom's Cabin was widely supported by the North and vehemently denounced by the South. In 1854, Senator Stephen Douglas proposed the Nebraska Bill, a bill to organize the Nebraska Territory. Douglas wanted a northern railway passage to the Pacific from Chicago that would pass through the Nebraska Territory and needed a compromise to do so. His compromise would give the territory popular sovereignty so that they could be incorporated into the Union and so the railway could be built. The compromise violated the Missouri Compromise of 1820, which prohibited slavery in the Great Plains, and thus would allow slavery in most of the West, much to the South's enjoyment. Southern senators, led by Missouri's David Atchison, wanted to repeal the line that the Great Plains territories were prohibited from slavery as part of the Compromise of 1820, and Douglas agreed to incorporate Atchison's wishes into the bill so it could be a better chance of passing. The Nebraska bill then became an issue of slavery. On May 30th, 1854, the bill narrowly passed in the Senate. Two new states, Kansas and Nebraska, were carved out of the Nebraska Territory. Kansas and Nebraska were given popular sovereignty. Thousands of settlers from both the North and the South traveled to Kansas to sway the state's votes on whether to allow slavery or not, thus beginning an era known as Bleeding Kansas. Pro-slavery voters were able to win the first initial election. The ensuing legislature incorporated Missouri's state code and included severe and harsh punishments for those who were openly against slavery. A second election was held in 1855. People from Missouri, pro-slavery border ruffians, poured into Kansas to sway the vote. The writing was on the wall. Kansas would be a pro-slavery state. Northern settlers were outraged and made up their own government in the town of Topeka, calling themselves the Free State or Free Soilers. Kansas erupted into violence. The abolitionist Free Soilers made up a small minority in Kansas's northern population. Most Northerners were not all staunch abolitionists. The Free Soilers hated slavery because the plantations took up large amounts of land and brought large amounts of black people wherever slavery was legal. In 1856, the pro-slavery capital was moved to the town of Lecompton, near the Free Soil stronghold of Lawrence. In May, pro-slavery men entered Lawrence, burning the Free State Hotel and ransacking stores and homes. The abolitionist John Brown led a group of men, including his 4 sons, in attacking 5 pro-slavery men, taking them from their homes and hacking them to death in the name of vengeance for Lawrence. In September of 1856, a new governor, John W. Gary, would bring order to Kansas, ending the period of Bleeding Kansas, which killed a total of 55 people over 2 years. The Kansas-Nebraska Act and Bleeding Kansas annihilated what was left of the Whig Party. The Whig Party was a coalition of several groups against the presidency of Andrew Jackson, formed in 1833. Unlike the Democratic Party, the Whigs were not opposed or for slavery, but some in the party did share such views. The issue of slavery consumed the Whigs with the introduction of the Kansas-Nebraska Act. Anti-slavery Whigs and Democrats splintered off their respective parties and formed the Republican Party in 1854, while the rest of the Whigs formed the xenophobic Know-Nothings movement and its political branch, the American Party. The Whig Party was politically dead by 1856. Dred Scott was a black slave under the ownership of John Emerson in Missouri, who he bought from the Blow family in the early 1830s. As part of his service in the military, Emerson had to move from Missouri, then to Illinois, then to the Wisconsin Territory, starting in 1833. Emerson took Scott with him. The Wisconsin Territory was considered free territory under the Missouri Compromise. During the move to Wisconsin, Scott married Harriet Robinson, a black woman, in 1838. In the same year, Emerson was stationed to Louisiana with his new wife, Irene Sanford. Emerson requested that Dred Scott and his wife, Harriet, join them. After making the trip to Louisiana, the Scotts went back up to Missouri, working for Emerson. Emerson would suddenly die in 1843, and his widow, Irene Sanford, considered Dred and Harriet Scott to be in her possession. Dred Scott looked for his and his wife's freedom with anti-slavery lawyers in 1846, arguing that since they had once lived in both free state and free territory, they would have been freed from slavery. The decision to make the Scots free was made by the Missouri State Court in 1850, but this decision was reversed in 1852. The Scots did not give up the search for freedom. Irene then gave control of the Scots to her brother, John Sanford, from New York State. As John Sanford was not subject to law in Missouri, the case made its way to federal court, then to the United States Supreme Court, on the arrangement of a new lawyer for the Scots, Roswell Field. In 1857, Supreme Court Chief Justice Roger B. Tanley ruled that Scott was still a slave and was not entitled to rights as a U.S. citizen, and therefore could not sue in federal court, and that the Scots were to remain enslaved. Abolitionists in the North, using this ruling by the Supreme Court, went on to convince many that the South were greatly determined to preserve and extend slavery. Dred and Harriet Scott would only get their freedom through the Blow family. The Blow family bought him and his wife, and then turned his freedom in 1857. Scott died the next year due to untimely tuberculosis, while Harriet died in 1876. In the 1860 election, Abraham Lincoln, albeit obscure in politics, captivated the North with his skills as an orator, but his anti-slavery views angered the South. Lincoln joined the Illinois Republican Party and the Republican Party in 1856, after the collapse of the Whig Party in 1854. In 1854, Lincoln made his Peoria speech, announcing his anti-slavery views, such views he'd carried to presidency. In 1858, he debated Stephen Douglas, the same man who made the Kansas-Nebraska Act, over the issues of slavery. His views made him very unpopular in the South, and there were talks of secession if he ever to be elected as presidency when he was nominated in 1860. Lincoln won the election of 1860 without any help from the South. Inability to nominate a candidate for the Democratic Party virtually put the election into Lincoln's pocket. Out of dislike of Lincoln in the South, Lincoln wasn't even put as an option in the ballots, but Lincoln was able to secure 18 out of 33 states, just over half. Lincoln won the election, and his win triggered the Secession crisis. On December 20th, 1860, South Carolina's leaders met and voted to leave the Union, giving the reasons that it wanted to preserve the social fabric of the South and slavery, accusing Lincoln of wanting to undermine these institutions. By February 1861, Mississippi, Florida, Alabama, Georgia, Louisiana, and Texas all followed South Carolina and voted to leave the Union, forming the Confederacy, officially the Confederate States of America. Thousands of young men rushed to join the ranks on both sides, and the industrial war machine of the North was activated. The South also began to muster a war industry, but the North far outnumbered the South in terms of industry. The situation looked dire.